Welcome back to Focus Lines. I'm Nihongo Gamer. I've had this camera for 3 days and these are my first impressions. What I hope to do is make this video after 3 days, maybe another video after 3 weeks, and then maybe another video after 3 months. This is the Fujifilm X-M5 up close. I just want to show you how incredibly small this camera is. In fact, it gets much smaller. I've got a grip on here. It's like a silicone grip, and this is a Fuji XF 27mm lens, which in 35mm equivalent is kind of like a 40mm lens. So the first pro is that you get Fuji colors out of this camera, and that's not just film simulations, but in general, the colors just look beautiful for photos and video. Even if you're not trying to make them look like analog film, they just look very pleasing, like a little bit closer to how you remember them. I don't know if they're actually more accurate, but it has a lot of the emotion of the real scene. So Fuji colors at an incredibly low price of $799. Now you can access these colors and make your own custom combinations, but you also have this film dial on the XM5 and it gives you really easy access. If you've never used film simulations before, you can just like flick through these like with an actual physical dial and go, does it look good in black and white? Does it look good in pro negative high or pro negative standard or acros or nostalgic neg or classic neg? But I will say that again, these are my 3-day opinions, and I'm pretty sure that after a week or maybe a few weeks, I'll probably change my mind. I'll be like, it's a bit of a waste of a dial. And there are some quirks about this dial, like you can not actually use it to access your custom versions of these filmy simulations. My opinions probably will change on this dial, but on day 3, I'm actually really liking it. The next thing I want to mention is just the small size of this camera. It's absolutely minuscule. So I talked about it earlier when I said that I've got this really tiny lens on here. This is not the kit lens. The kit lens is actually a fair bit bigger than this, but this XF 27mm is about as small a lens you can get for this at, at a reasonable focal length that's not ultra wide. And the body of the camera itself is small enough that I would say it's back pocketable. It won't really go in your front pocket, but that's not that important to me. I think even if I had a compact camera with a telescoping lens, the thing about them is that when they close, they kind of suck dust back into the camera. If I need to take it off my neck or take it off my wrist so that I can help my son, basically, my son is 4, I often have to help him with all sorts of stuff. I can slide it into my back pocket and it feels safe. Like it's not going anywhere. It's not like just barely fitting. It's actually kind of falling out of my pocket. Like it fits in my back pocket, and that's good enough for an emergency. The rest of the time I have it resting on my body like this with this neck strap. I usually have it kind of like this so I can have it swung around behind me. Now the next pro is actually that this camera has a customizable shutter button. So on this completely manual analog film camera, I actually used to put a cable release. You could screw a cable release into here. I don't actually know if that's the point of this. I think you can use a cable release, but I think mostly the reason people enjoy this is because you can use something like this, a custom shutter button. So you just screw it in like so, and instantly as like a bit of a fashion statement, it's really, really nice. If you like the idea of people coming up to you to like become friends with you and you just want to meet people, you've got a little talking item here, which is also functionally useful as a camera. But you're probably wondering, why don't I have a shutter button screwed in on here, even though I own one? And the reason is that even though it looks really cool, I actually want this camera to be as discreet as possible, which is why I bought the completely all black version of this. But the other reason that I removed the shutter button is, as you can see here, the power button is absolutely tiny. When you have this shutter button installed, it makes it that tiny little bit more difficult to like use the fleshy part of your finger. You actually, instead of like doing this to roll it on and off like this, which you can do, it's a little bit more tricky. You kind of have to like turn your finger a little bit sideways so that you can like reach that bit. It's just a little bit more difficult to like get your finger into that groove to actually turn it on and off. So I just found it easier to just not have a shutter button. And also, I don't really want the fashion statement. I just want the shutter. I just want to be able to press the button. The next pro with the XM5 is actually the touch screen. I'm not usually a fan of touch screens on my camera, but because it doesn't have an EVF or an OVF here that you can look through to see things, I actually end up relying on this screen quite a lot. And actually, when you're using it a little bit like a glorified smartphone, having these touch gestures is really handy. It's so fast. I was really impressed with how fast and smooth this screen is. I don't know what the refresh rate, but it just feels really smooth. It's just not what I was expecting. You also have touchscreen gestures for shortcuts. So I access my custom one settings like this by swiping down. I can just swipe up like this to turn face detection on and off. I can also swipe right to change my AF modes from like single point to zone focus. If I swipe left, I can go from continuous AF to single AF or manual focus. So even though I'm using it as a bit of a smartphone replacement, it still gives me access to a lot of professional features that I would expect from what I use like my A7C II, which is my big full frame camera. Now, one feature I didn't even realize existed on this camera is something I found on a video from a creator called Me, I believe that's how, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, but you can actually access the Bluetooth without turning the camera on. So if you leave it on, like so I have to put it on like this, and then I actually switch the camera off, then even though it's off, when I use my mobile phone, I can actually open up the Fujifilm X app, and I can actually download my photos from the camera to here without turning it on physically, so it could be like in a bag somewhere else. This is like a bit of a game changer feature, especially if you're using it as your like everyday carry. Now, there are way more pros to the XM5, but it's only day 3. So if I make another video in a few weeks and say like this is my use after 3 weeks, maybe I'll go into a little bit more detail. But those currently are the main pros that make this camera, like, you probably already are convinced. You're probably like, wow, this is definitely the camera I need. But what's really weird is that these pros are really great, but there are some major cons, and I'm about to go into them now. The first con is that this is not a comfortable camera to hold, and the reason is it's kind of a compromise. So if you look at this camera, you can see it's not as compact as one of those like point and shoot classic digital compact cameras from the 90s or the early 2000s. It's a little bit bigger, and mostly because it's got an APS-C sensor in here, which is great. As a result, it is a little bit bigger, but not big enough that it's actually easy to hold, which is why I've got this silicone grip on here. This is the small rig grip I've got on here. It costs about 6,000 yen, so it's like, I don't know, $40. And this is like a must-have for the camera because it's not comfortable to hold without it. Let's say that you don't have the thumb grip either, and this is just the camera. You can't really hold it like this, like a standard digicam, because it's just too heavy. You end up kind of pressing the button by accident. Now, if you are holding it with 2 hands, it's kind of not so bad, but most of the time, I think probably what you want to be doing is holding it one-handed like this, and just go snap, snap, snap. If you actually did that with this camera, your palm would touch the screen here and you'd be like focusing on different things. If you disable the touchscreen, you lose a lot of functionality, so I don't recommend that. This thing here, this little grip, this actually works quite well, but that's not really the problem. Like, the thumb grip here is quite nice, but as you can see, now you end up kind of rubbing your finger across this dial. And the thing about this dial is that not only are you accidentally changing things like your aperture or whatever you've got it set to, it also pushes in, and it's really easy to accidentally press this dial in. And if you press that dial in, it sifts through the other functions. You can have 4 different functions. Honestly, it was really bugging me on day 1, so I just deactivated it, and it just changes my aperture. When it's like this, you just kind of accidentally focus on stuff, or you change settings on the touchscreen. It's really annoying. So the first thing you absolutely buy, even if you're not going to buy this, the small rig silicone grip thing, is this. You should absolutely, I feel like this is a 100% must. It's the thumb grip for here. If you buy this, you might actually be fine without getting this. The problem with the thumb grip is that now you have almost no access to this Q button. You're definitely not going to be pressing it quickly. If you kind of dig your finger in here, you can press it, but it's like, you won't be able to do it very quickly. Now you can't really reach the exposure compensation dial, which is a really important dial. So like, you'd have to like move your thumb around the grip to press it. Now the thing about this grip is that the camera is beautiful without the grip. So when you watch YouTube videos like this, you'll probably be like, oh, I don't want to ruin the look of the camera by having this big bulky grip on it. It kind of ruins the whole small compact size of the camera. It's just like, why did I bother buying such a tiny camera if I'm just going to put a massive hand grip on it anyway? But I want to show you 2 things. Once the hand grip is on here, it's amazing. It feels beautiful. I love holding it like this because I can put my finger under here and just let the camera, and just let it hang. The combination of this hand grip and the thumb grip together, it makes it like really great. It just makes it really feel good. I can't stress this enough, but in real life, it does not look that much bigger. One more thing about the thumb grip is that it also makes it really difficult to press the playback button and the exposure lock button. The next con is that because it's such a small camera, you really don't have a lot of space for buttons. As you can see, we have an exposure lock here and an AF lock button here, but we don't have a button that I can just press to go into AF, like if I want to have back button focus. So you can change this button here, the AF lock button, to be AF on, but then as a result, you won't be able to use it for AE lock, and I really need it for AE lock, and I'll explain that right after this. But speaking of AF, I want to talk about the focus on this camera, because it's not terrible, but coming from Sony, it's kind of like, with Sony, it's like you don't have to think anymore. Like the camera just does the work for you. It's only been 3 days for me, but I'm still kind of struggling to find ways to get it to focus on what I actually want it to focus on. But that brings me on to the next thing which annoys me about the autofocus, and is that the eye tracking autofocus is tied to the exposure. Okay, I don't actually know if it's working, but I hope it's working. So it's managed to take this picture of my face, and it has managed to figure out where my face is, and I think it knew where my eye was. But when you use anything like face autofocus or eye autofocus, it also exposes the face as well as possible, which means that the whole scene, if you had like balanced metering for the whole scene, it kind of throws everything out of whack and everything ends up too bright. In this particular scene, there's not anything here that would get washed out, but 8 out of 10 photos I take in my house, I'm doing it without flash, and people are kind of like, there's a lot of lights coming from the ceiling, which means that the face is a little bit dark, but I'm fine with that because I want the overall photo to be nice and bright. If I really wanted to overexpose so that the faces are nice, I'll just turn up the exposure compensation. But it's kind of finicky. It's like sometimes it will expose okay and they'll be like, the face is okay and it'll be like fine. But other times it'll be like, okay, it needs like 1 or 2 stops extra for the face, and it'll just like punch the whole exposure up for the photo, and just stuff gets blown out like to the point that you can't really retrieve it in post. So if you're familiar with exposure settings on a camera, you can usually set it to something like multi or center weighted or spot, but all of this gets completely ignored if you turn your eye tracking on. So if I turn my eye tracking on like this, it will now find eyes in the photo, but look here. Now when I go to my photometry settings, which is what it's called, it's completely grayed out. It's like it does not care what kind of overall photo you want it to take. You can't access it at all because it's like, well, now that we're focusing on your eye, we're also going to expose to make sure that the eyeball is perfectly exposed. And just ignore the other 98% of my photo. Why? Why would you do that? Maybe this is like a feature that people actually enjoy, but coming from Sony, coming from Panasonic, like I've never seen a camera do it quite like this. I've never seen it lock you out of your metering modes, photometry as they call it on Fujifilm. I've never been locked out of my exposure modes completely just because I had the eye tracking autofocus set on. So if I turn it back off and go into the menu, you can see photometry is now accessible again, and I can go back to multi. It actually drives me crazy because I'm using it as my everyday carry. So I'm taking pictures of my family and I want to use the eye tracking autofocus because 99% of the time, I want their faces to be in focus. So why do I also have to see the whole photo get blown out to the point that I can't even retrieve it from the raw file? It's like, what is the point of this? If you're a Fuji shooter and you actually understand why it's like this and that maybe there's a really good reason for this, please write in the comments and let me know, because I genuinely want to understand. So in order to counteract this, I have a solution. When I press this button, it only locks the exposure. So it's like, okay, exposure is locked. It's now ISO 3200 f2.8. Now, even if I focus on a face and it wants like ISO 5000, it won't. It will take the photo at ISO 3200. And that way the whole scene will be beautiful and maybe the face will be a little bit darker, but I can change that in post. That's the whole point of having, I just don't understand. Now there's one last con that I'm going to share with you, and it's something that's kind of important because I think a lot of people don't realize this before they buy a Fuji camera. Maybe a lot of people do realize this and I'm not aware of it. But I was aware of this, I knew it, and I still bought the camera, but I want to share it with you. Can you watch this? See that? It says storing, and it does that for about 1.5, almost 2 seconds. The reason it does this is because this one setting here that says clarity, if you change this to anything that is not 0, it causes that delay. So if I take the same picture again without clarity set to anything, it's just set to 0, immediately I get the preview, or I can just turn preview off and I can use high-speed drive modes. I could even take like 5 photos per second like this. Once I change this clarity setting to anything that's not 0, so I change it to -1 or -2, if basically I want to get that slightly more analog look. And instantly, once you've changed that setting, boom, you go back into the 1.5 seconds of storing. Now there's one fix that I found online which ended up to be not true, but apparently if you turn the drive mode settings like this, if you turn it on to high speed, 3 frames per second, it's just like, oh no. But guess what? You've been conned. Because actually, if you go down here, you can actually see that it just turned clarity off. It actually didn't warn you at all. It's just like, okay, you went into high drive mode. By the way, we're just going to completely change your picture settings. Clarity is now back to 0 because it's not capable of taking fast photos without setting clarity to 0. The reason I think this is kind of important is because probably a lot of people are buying this camera knowing that you can make custom settings. Like, film simulations are amazing, but probably one of the things you really want to do with the film simulations is make your own custom versions of them. But once you actually change things like clarity, which is one of the more important ones in my opinion, you have this massive delay of a 1.5 seconds while you wait for the photo. The screen goes completely black, so you have to like move away from the camera and actually look at your subject with your eyes, because you can't look at the picture is no longer showing you a preview of what the camera can see. One thing I am curious to see is whether the Panasonic S9, which is a full frame camera, and so obviously the lenses are going to be a lot bigger, but the Panasonic S9 has a feature called, I think they're called like photographic LUTs. They're just like user LUTs that you can, a bit like when you color grade. I assume that there's no like weird like storing phase after that. I think it works completely differently, so I assume it's much faster, but I don't know. I've never used the S9, so if you're a Panasonic S9 user, I'm curious to know. Let me know. I'm not going to buy one though, because the point of this camera is to be nice and small. Listen, this video got significantly longer than I wanted it to be. It's only meant to be my 3-day impressions, but it's probably going to sound like a full-on review. There's a lot that I do not know about this camera yet. But what I want you to take away from this is that in order to be this size, with this performance, with these colors, with this lens, actually I forgot to talk about the lens, the autofocus is so slow. If you want this package as your everyday camera, so a little bit bigger than maybe the Ricoh GR3, actually quite a bit bigger, but you don't mind just turning it into the camera that you always have slung around your neck, then I still think this is, at the moment, I think it is perfect. It's beautiful. I absolutely love taking pictures with this. So the reason I wanted to make this video was that despite all of those cons I just explained, those cons make it sound like it's just the worst camera ever. And yet, I'm still almost 100% convinced that this will be my everyday carry going forward for a very long time. So despite being imperfect, I think it could still be the perfect everyday camera. But what do you think? Let me know. You've probably got a large number of other cameras that you think would be much better. If you're interested, this has been the Fujifilm X-M5, and it was completely out of stock for a very long time. Good luck trying to find one. I realize it's difficult to find. I got lucky. I did wait I waited almost 5 months to pick this camera up. It was very tempting to like pay extra money and buy it from one of those people who's like not an official vendor, but I waited and I finally got it officially at the right price in stock. So many good things to say about it, but also so many kind of confusing things about it. So let me know what you guys think. This has been Focus Lines. Subscribe if you enjoyed this content and check out some of my other videos. I'll see you all real soon.